how have you had to construct your own commercial team, your own go-to-market team? Increasingly across the industry, we're seeing more and more of the technology companies hiring career IT professionals who never worked in a commercial role or sales role before. And companies like yours are increasingly going to engineers. Like, what's the profile? Who's the right person that has the credibility to be a peer in these kinds of conversations?
We take folks right out of the consulting world. Because if you think about it, folks like myself who came out of management consulting at the top tier firms, we sell the future, right? That's what a consultant actually does. They're not selling a product. They're not selling a service. When you walk in and you're a management consultant, and you're talking directly to the CEO of a Fortune 500 company and describing to them how they're going to save money or make more money or whatever it is that you're tackling for them, right? You literally have to understand fully what they're doing, understand fully what the market's doing, and then you creating a solution out of whole cloth for them that's brand new, that's going to make a difference based upon all the best practices that you've seen across the industry. That's exactly what's happening right now. And that's exactly what we did at Open Origin that's not being done by most of these data center providers. They're taking business as usual, what we did on the grid, and we're trying to turn it into something that sort of fits this new hyperscaler world where everything is so much larger. But guess what? Cooling systems don't scale to gigawatt scale. The same thing that works at 100 megawatts does not work very well and creates a huge heat island effect out there in the world if you do it at gigawatt scale. And if you take it to 9 or 10 gigawatts, like we're doing out in Utah with Kevin O'Leary's scenario, you're creating massive heat islands with the amount of heat coming off of these things that is unprecedented in human history. We've never done anything that hot all the time. So we really don't know what the effect is. And so these are the types of considerations that simply aren't present anywhere else. And it doesn't work to assume that, that doing something that worked at 100 megawatts and scaling it up to gigawatt plus is going to be the right answer. So I think that's the thing I see that where there's gaps. And it's probably not the right sales guy to go out and hire the guy from the utilities industry to do this, because he's thinking about it completely differently than the management consultant would.
So it's very different than a traditional account executive, account manager.
Very different.
Playbook, a band kind of a mindset with all of this. And what's interesting too, is you mentioned earlier that there's certain kinds of stakeholders that were basically seeing their jobs threatened because you're doing something that's reasonably disrupted. So that challenges the whole idea of talent shortages that so many people are running around complaining about and terrified about in the data center industry. And yet there's a completely different kind of talent that you need to be able to advance something that's this different than the perspective that real estate developers, real estate investment trusts are used to thinking about.
That is very, very true. And to kind of put a really sharp pin on that, we thought we had a great partnership arranged with one of the top technology advisors around energy for the data center industry, right? They were folks that had advised one of the largest hyperscalers in the world for 2 decades, had helped them create what an AI data center looked like. And their partner was very excited about our solution. We had several great conversations. And so then they brought in their technical team, because their technical team were owners in the partnership to sort of vet our solution. And the technical team laughed us out of the room, despite the fact that our solution had been designed by the #1 data center engineering firm in the world for the past 5 years. And it wasn't Open Origin saying this is the thing that worked. This was the #1 engineering firm in the world saying that this solution works. And it had presented at CIRID, and it had won accolades and been presented twice. That's how good it was to hundreds of engineers at CIRID who had held it up as the example for this is how we should build engineering in the future. And these guys were so set in their way that they could not see the forest for the trees. And they left us out of the room, and the partner was so embarrassed that the partnership fell apart. It was really crazy. And now, but effectively, what those engineers saw was they were completely irrelevant to the conversation. They had no job. Their job was just gone. It wasn't, fading into the background, but their entire reason for existing as a consulting firm was disappeared.
Reminds me of Moneyball.
That's exactly
threatening their whole way of life, the old-fashioned
way of life.
scouts that didn't want to use analytics and spreadsheets.
That's exactly what it was. And they weren't using AI that way. They were still doing the same thing. They were still convinced that things had to be built in a certain way, and the hot and cold racks and the whole 9 yards. And even though they'd done things that were very innovative earlier, right? They still were thinking about it from a technology perspective. And when it became a real estate transaction, they didn't know how to handle that. It didn't make sense to them anymore. Now, the crazy part is that we still would have hired them, right? They had value to us as the customer. But what they saw is that they were moving out of the control position and into becoming a technology advisory service to the actual service provider. And they couldn't stomach that because they're making top dollar right now, right? $1,000 an hour type of rates. And now they're going to just be also ran engineers, at normal engineering rates, advising a real estate company on building stuff. And they just couldn't find themselves in that position.
Yeah, we're going through the exact same transition when we look at commercial teams. We're in a world where IT buyers and engineers are getting their answers directly from their favorite ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, what have you. The account executive and the sales development rep and account manager would be phenomenal curators, moderators, explainers, bringing together all of these subject matter experts, but they're going to have to sit in the co-pilot seat next to the true subject matter expert to get back in the door with the peers, because nobody needs them to read the information on website or YouTube or on the generative AI tools anymore. So yeah, for sure. And it's got massive implications too, even in this industry, because hundreds of millions are spent annually on these massive conferences. And
exactly,
the buying habits have changed so much.
Well, and on top of that, and I'll just tell you internally, right? We have a really tight ship on the go-to-market side. We actually have 3 dedicated resources only for all of the work that we do, and that's not just in the data center space. We actually serve the chemical and manufacturing industry as well. So we have a partner manager who manages all of our real estate partnerships, and those folks, as we said, that's our really the path to get to the decision makers through the real estate side. That's where we found is very successful. We have a real actual dedicated salesperson for federal, right? So all government, we have a dedicated person, because that person, you got to have the dedicated federal person. That's how that's going to work. And they've done really well because they've been super dedicated just to federal. And then everything else goes directly to the CRO. And the CRO personally manages, because he came from the big guys. He's been CRO for, Tata and those guys, really big consulting firms. The reason for that is the volume of actual qualified leads isn't very big. It's a few hundred qualified leads a year, and the decision time on a particular lead is measured in months, right? So having, if you can get 3 or 4 phone calls in a month on a particular account to move things forward, as things are getting hot and heavy, you're doing pretty well, because the hyperscalers love to make you hurry up and wait. Oh my God, they love that so much, right? Because their procedure for going through this historically is it took 5 years from, hey, we need to build another data center, to, oh, let's break ground, right? They want that now to be shortened, but they're not playing like they want that to be shortened, right? They're not acting like they want this to take 18 months. They're still taking 18 months to get to an 18-month decision, instead of taking 2 months to get to an 18-month decision, which is actually where we could be if they simply said, hey, look, companies like Open Origin, you're covering the financial risk, you're providing the land, you're providing the facility, you're providing the utilities and everything, which is what many of these companies are now offering. I'll withhold judgment on whether they actually can deliver all that, but that's beside the point. And if that's really the case, why am I doing all this other stuff? Why am I taking 18 months to get to a decision? I mean, don't I want my GPUs to be deployed? I mean, didn't Microsoft's CEO very recently come out and say, I've got warehouses full of GPUs I can't deploy because my data centers aren't ready yet? And yet it still takes 18 months to get to a buying decision.
I think there's definitely stakeholders in different pockets of this industry that feel like if they can keep the status quo going, no one will notice that they may not be as valuable as they were 12, 24, 36 months ago, and they won't have to reskill move around to a different part of the industry, confront the reality of how quickly the world is changing?
I'm going to say unqualified, yes, that's absolutely the case. However, it's unlike most of the conspiracy theorists, it is not a coordinated effort, right? It's individually they're doing that, but collectively the effect is very similar, right? You still got people who are who are on the technical side, who are like poo-pooing the solutions that are being offered and being like, no, there's no way that can be true because of X, Y, and Z, not realizing that X, Y, and Z aren't even applicable in this case because they're not grid connected, or they're using a different battery technology, or they're using superconductors, so there's no losses in the system. So all of these assumptions that they've made their living on working around no longer are even there, right? Like, the 24 months ago it was, oh, nobody can build power in a data center in 6 months until XAI did it, right? And proved that you could just by schlepping in a bunch of batteries and generators into a room and calling it a day, right? And running everything on low power because you couldn't get a transformer in the door. Now, is that the right way to do it? Probably not. But is it a way to do it? Yeah, it did. Now, is he paying through the nose? I mean, he's probably paying the equivalent of 20 or 30 cents a kilowatt hour for all of that, because of but all that's internal cost, right? I mean, the guy owns a battery factory, so he was able to do things like bring in a gigawatt hour plus worth of batteries to support and even out his flow so that it doesn't knock his grid generation offline every time there's a spin up on the GPUs. So I think there's new challenges here, on the data center side with large jobs going up and down. No one's ever seen a gigawatt of GPUs turn on and off with an off switch before, right? In reality, and yet that's exactly what's about to happen. And we've already seen that the grid's not real friendly for that kind of load swap, right? 900 megawatts on and off, they don't like that in half a second, right? That is not a normal load profile from the grid's perspective, and it flips breakers sometimes, right? But you can't predict when it's going to flip and when it's not because of the strain on the system. So something that's perfectly safe in January, in June, not so much. That's what happened in Spain. We had a failing back there last summer that caused that big, massive outage that cascaded all across Europe. And we came within one breaker failing in Virginia 2 years ago that a lot of people don't know about, but there was a similar incident that almost occurred where we had one breaker that didn't blip. And if it had blipped, the whole East Coast would have been out again, just like in Spain. So we came within the quantum tolerance of a transformer, not a circuit breaker, not flipping, on just because we lucked out, right? I don't know if I want to bet the farm of the entire East Coast again on whether or not a data center breaker holds.
We're going to do a follow-up interview I had someone on the podcast a month or two ago who is a 35, 40-year retired veteran Dominion Energy guy who spent his entire career building out electric infrastructure for data centers in Virginia. It'd be really interesting to get his take.
Yeah, I'm sure he'd be like, we did not plan for this. It is probably what he would be saying, because that, to put it in perspective, 2 years ago, all of the Virginia, DC area, tri-state area data center capacity combined was 2.3 gigawatts 2 years ago. And today, we've got people building individual data centers that are twice that size. That's crazy.
Insane growth.
Yeah, insane growth.